hope you received a lot of great information. I know I did. I actually understand it so much better. So give JD a call. Oh, is there any charge for them to call you and talk to you?
Absolutely not.
No charge. There you go. So we bring the best to you for free. So give them a call. Call Arden Courts. Call Sharon Agate, and call Sokoff Legal. And we'll see you next time on caregiversolutions.info.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Is Talk 1470.
Talk 1470.
WNN. Talk 1470. WWNN Pompano Beach, Boca Raton, Miami, Fort Lauderdale.
AM 1470, WNN, with more of what you need to know. Here are the latest from Invite Health with Jerry Hickey, weekdays at 9 on AM 1470, WNN. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. The content of the following program, including all statements from the host and guests, is to provide general information and commentary about the law. Under no circumstances does any statement made by a host or guest to a caller or listener constitute legal advice or the formation of an attorney-client relationship, and the material from this program should not be viewed as a substitute for personal consultation with an attorney. Welcome to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. Jeff will be discussing a variety of legal topics with experts in the field. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, let's talk legal with Jeff Van Treese.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of Talk Legal. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. I'm an attorney with the law firm Oltman, Flynn & Kubler, where we practice intellectual property law, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights. You can check us out online and view all archived episodes of this show on our website at oltmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. I'd like to thank all of our listeners, including those of you tuning in on the AM dial, as well as those watching online. If you have a question, comment, or story that you'd like to share on the air, please feel free to call us toll-free at 888-565-1470. This evening, I'd like to start out by acknowledging the recent passing of what I consider to be the greatest prosecutor ever, Vincent Bugliosi. Vince was on my show in April for what I believe was his last public appearance. Vince was the author of Helter Skelter and the prosecutor of the the Charles Manson family with the Tate LaBianca murders back in 1971. And he was on this show back in April to discuss his book, A Prosecution of an American President, in which he put forth his proposed prosecution of George W. Bush for the Iraq War. So it is with great sadness that I have to report the passing of Vincent Bugliosi. He will be missed, and his legacy in the legal community will live on forever. So moving on, my guest this evening is Steve Esdale. He and his attorney, who is going to be appearing on the phone, Mark Lord, have a very interesting story regarding the suspicious circumstances surrounding his father's death. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Esdale. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for inviting me today.
And Mark, can you hear me?
I can, Jeff. Thank you.
Good. Thank you so much for joining us. So if you could just give us a bit of an introduction about the circumstances surrounding your father's death.
I was told on January 13, 2003, that my father died a natural death in his home in Sarasota, Florida, on Siesta Key. And I became suspicious, and I ordered a copy of the 911 call that was made by his wife of 3 weeks, the day he died. And I was shocked and terrified when I played the call in my stereo, and this woman, the wife of 3 weeks, told the 911 operator that my father was not speaking, not breathing, and totally gone. And when I listened to the 911 recording after she told the operator those statements, all of a sudden I heard my father cry out and say, "You said you were going to get me an ambulance. That's what you told me." I almost dropped dead. I can't even explain the feeling, and my heart dropped to my stomach. And then a short time after that, when the woman was being instructed on how to do CPR, it's like she took a commercial break. She said, "1 moment, please." And the next thing you know, I hear her yelling at my father to give up numerous times. And then, obviously, after my father no longer was with us, she came back to the phone, relieved, and then the call carried on. And one thing led to another, and I'm left with a recording of my father telling me and everyone else who killed him, his last words, and what he went through.
Now, what makes the story very different is that there's evidence of police that there could have been tampering from law enforcement on this tape. If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, when I received the recording, halfway through the recording, like if you had it on your stereo set at number 3 volume, all of a sudden it dropped to like 0 and you could no longer hear it. And what they did is they took a digital recording, they spliced it, and they put it onto a cassette tape and made multiple generations of the cassette tape until you no longer could hear my father being murdered in the background. And that copy was sent off to the FBI, where they requested that the FBI analyze the recording and make a transcript of what they believe they hear. And that altered recording has shielded law enforcement that destroyed evidence and obstructed justice. It shielded them from accountability, and it's left my family anguishing for over 12 years now.
So, Mark, when this case came to you and when you heard about this, and you practice in a variety of areas of law, and I know that you do estates and you've done probate, and that's how you came into this case. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Jeff, I've mentioned this many times, of course, to Steve. We've talked quite a bit over the 7+ years I was involved with the case, and we still talk probably weekly or more. But no, and I've mentioned that as I got into it, Steve had located me because I had done a prenup for Murray Cohen, the decedent, and he'd heard that, I guess. He was trying to find out who the lawyer that had done that, because she had not been married to him, quote, married to him that long. But it became clear to me early on. First of all, I had to kind of gauge what was going on, because I didn't really know that Murray had, left us until Steve kind of caught me up on what happened after the prenup, and I never saw it, of course. This is the one case where I did it for him, and he was going to sign it, and get her to sign it and give it back. And I put it in his hands sometime in the month of November of 2002, before he was to marry her in December. And of course, I never saw him again. But when I was briefed on what was going on, as I recall, when I came into it, what was happening was money was being yanked out of the estate for legal fees by a firm in town that was representing Mrs. Cohen, Muriel Cohen. And my first thrust was to try to stop money from going out, since there was serious questions regarding his passing. And of course, you're aware of somewhat, probably, of the Slayer statute under Florida, which, of course, disallows anyone who commits a murder or any type of other crimes as well from inheriting.
And that's how you came to bring on your investigation was through the Slayer statute in Florida, which says that somebody that kills another person cannot inherit from the person that they killed. I'd like to, and that's how you were able to subpoena some witnesses and attempt to get some information, although unfortunately most of your efforts were unsuccessful. I want to ask Steve, how deep was the cover-up here and the levels of government that you allege are involved in the cover-up of your father's murder as you see it?
It started with just the Sarasota Sheriff's Department. And the more that I fought and the more that I uncovered, the more layers of government were brought out to deal with me. Then came FDLE. And then I obtained some TV coverage from Fox 13 in Tampa, and they sent a copy of their broadcast to Governor Bush's office. He was the governor at the time of my dad's murder. And they sent him a copy, and I was advised by the anchor to call the legal office and request a special prosecutor be appointed and that the governor order FDLE to do a full-blown investigation.
FDLE, just to clarify, is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Yes, sir. And I did that. And what happened is, instead of appointing a special prosecutor and ordering FDLE to investigate the overwhelming evidence of obstruction of justice by the Sarasota Sheriff's Department, Jeb Bush ordered a review. It's the same thing as a whitewash. And after he ordered the review of my dad's case, all my media coverage stopped. The newspaper, the Sarasota Herald Tribune, Fox 13, it just stopped. And I truly believe that because Governor Bush had a brother that was the president, he could easily obtain what he needed to squelch this public relations issue that's brewing. And the FBI examined a deliberately altered recording to block me from getting justice for my dad and to hold these police officers accountable for what they've done.
Why do you think that the Bush family, Jeb Bush, would attempt to obstruct justice in this instance? Because it seems like he'd have a lot to lose if this scandal was...
It's not that he woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm gonna screw Steve Esdale's family. I believe that political loyalty prevailed over rule of law and equal justice for a Floridian.
And I say the Bush family because at the time his brother was the President of the United States, George W. Bush.
Yes.
We did a show on that with Vince Bugliosi a few months ago. With Bush in the White House, George W. Bush, he was potentially influencing the FBI. You think it could have gone that far, all the way up to the federal level?
Oh yes, because I was relentless and I uncovered. Because really, their cover-up was really pathetic. It was elementary. It's not. I'm no great investigator, but it was just so pathetic. And really, that by getting the FBI to make a transcript off of that cassette tape, that guaranteed, with the good name of the FBI at the top of the report, that guaranteed that no matter who I brought in and what expert I brought in, that I was never going to succeed. And, you know, as we all know, Sarasota is, I call, ground zero for Republican operations. So you have Joe Beercan come along and uncover that his father was murdered. You got a Republican sheriff. You got a Republican governor. You got a president who politicized the Justice Department at that time. So it's not too far-fetched that they said, look, we need something to stop this guy. And the thing that they obtained was this FBI report derived from altered evidence, which has stopped and blocked me from getting justice and closure for almost 13 years.
Now, we should say, in all fairness, that the person that you're accusing of murdering your father has not been found guilty by a jury of her peers. However, in order to arrest someone, they simply need probable cause. That's what law enforcement needs to arrest. And considering that that's a very, very low bar, and certainly to investigate a potential suspicious death, there is no standard that they have to meet. This seems like there's certainly more than enough evidence to do an investigation, which we talked about before the show was never done here. No arrest was made, and it's really astounding when you think of other crimes where people are arrested, tried, and convicted with evidence that is much flimsier than this. What's your take on that, Mark?
Well, as I kind of mentioned somewhat before, Jeff, and I've mentioned this to other people, even people socially, because this case is just so unbelievable. And as Steve said, if law enforcement had done what their normal job is to do, that they get called out, to the man's residence, and they find a substance at the house that later became known as Corazol, and they don't find anything suspicious about that being in a house on Siesta Key, when it's a substance that, number one, is not a prescribed medication. You cannot get it in this country.
It's an experimental anti-epilepsy drug, if I'm correct,
Right,
and
that's
it's
what
something
I
that
learned, Jeff, from being on the case, and just finding that at the house of someone who less than 3 weeks ago marries, and I might say someone who was a millionaire who married this younger lady. Then as I've learned in being on the case, that the sheriff's department right then and there could have had an exhumation. After this is even after the quote funeral, to determine if that was in his tissues. They could have done it. The District 12 medical examiner could have done it, and conceivably the state attorney's office could have done it. But Steve and I have talked about this, and if you can't get to the body, your probable cause, other than just wondering why he would die so suddenly, is not there. And of course, that's just the start of it. I mean, as I mentioned, I was in the probate proceeding level.
Mark, we're going to have to wrap it up in just a minute because I have to go to commercial break.
Sure. So, to my way of thinking, that it was just a deliberate dereliction of duty on the part of the sheriff's department.
Well, we're going to have to take a short break to hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be back. Please stay tuned.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Fresh Start Tax. Fresh Start Tax offers a full range of tax and accounting services, including tax return preparation and bookkeeping, as well as back taxes, wage garnishments, unfiled returns, or any other tax-related concern. Our dedicated team of tax attorneys, CPAs, and former IRS agents offer over 60 years of professional tax experience. For a free consultation, call 866-700-1040. That's 866-700-1040. You can also visit us on the web at freshstarttax.com. This program is brought to you by the law firm of Altman, Flynn & Kubler. We practice elder law and intellectual property, including patents, trademarks, and copyrights. If you would like to patent your idea, please contact our Fort Lauderdale office for a free consultation. Call 954-563-4814. That's 954-563-4814. Or visit us online at altmanpatent.com. That's OLTMANPATENT.com. Spokesperson, not an attorney. You're listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese, who brings you all the latest news in the legal world. If you would like to ask a question or share a story on the air, please call toll-free 888-565-1470. Once again, that's 888-565-1470. Now, back to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese.
Welcome back. This evening we're discussing a very sad story. My guest's father, who died very suddenly under suspicious circumstances. And before the break, we were talking about some of the allegations of cover-up surrounding this case. So, Steve, your case shortly after your case was profiled shortly after it broke on a number of news outlets, some local news stations, as well as newspapers. It was profiled on the Geraldo Rivera show, Geraldo at Large, on Fox News. I wanted to ask you about your relationship with the media. You had originally, your story had gotten some coverage, and then it just sort of abruptly stopped.
Yes, the Fox 13 promised me, and the national Fox, that they would continue my story until the questions were answered that weren't answered. And after that copy was sent to Governor Bush's legal office, everything stopped. The print and the Fox coverage, which I now, learned that I went to the wrong media outlet to begin with.
And you've since reached out to some other media outlets, including 48 Hours, I think we were talking about, and they haven't really responded to you because they want to see an end to the story.
Yes, they want an ending, and then other outlets really weren't interested in picking up someone else's used story. Fox made me a used story and then threw it away, and then the public forgot about it.
Which is, very disturbing, considering how, how much suspicion that there is surrounding your father's death. I'd like to talk a little bit about the 911 tape, which you
Yes.
believe really is the smoking gun here.
Yes.
That proves what happened. Kenny, if you could, in the control room, if you could play that 911 excerpt.
Ma'am? Ma'am, what were you doing? Ma'am? Ma'am, what were you doing?
It's
Ma'am?
just a loop.
Okay. Kenny, you can turn that off.
The purpose of that excerpt is in the FBI report where that woman clearly is yelling, "Give up." They say that she's saying the words "me more." They're not even close.
And
That's not "me more." That's "give up."
so that combined with, and you mentioned that there was the impression of a footprint on your deceased father's body that
Yes.
was also.
Yes. What happened is she panicked. She didn't ever plan on putting her hands on my dad. If she would have gave him the poison and then went shopping and came back hours later, I would have never heard that on the 911 recording. But if you listen to the complete recording, when my dad started crying out for an ambulance, the operator said, "Is he awake now?" And she realized the paramedics are already dispatched. They're going to be at the door any minute. Her victim's now still alive. So that's why she dropped the phone and had to manually take care of him. I get copies of the death scene photos, and my father has a footprint on his back. And I learned about lividity, which is the blood settles to the lowest point when you die. The lividity showed that my father died face down, but yet in the call, when she came back to the phone and she was relieved that he no longer was talking, she blows in the phone like she's performing CPR. How do you perform CPR on a person that died face down? It's just insulting.
Now, getting back to the cover-up, you were accosted by some agents at one time, and you think that was an attempt to get you to be silent.
Oh yes, I lost my home in the battle, and we were scared because now we realized the police were covering up the murder, and we were scared from the killer and people coming after us because we were fighting to expose it. So I moved into my mother-in-law's house for a brief time for 10 months, and there came a day where my wife was off, and there was a banging at the door. And there was 4 FDLE agents with bulletproof vests and guns drawn.
Again, that's the Florida Department of Law Enforcement.
Yes. And they said to my wife, and this is the day after I put up the website, Cohen Murder. They said to my wife, "We want to go on your computer and we want to know who did your website." And my wife's like 4'11", and she said to these guys, "If you don't have a warrant, you can't come in." So they said, "Ma'am, step outside." And they made her come outside. And 2 stood behind her and 2 stood in front of her, and they were verbally badgering her. And my wife was about to go pick up my son from school. And she was crying. She said, "I got to pick up my son." And they wouldn't let her go. They said, "Ma'am, take your phone, call your husband, and you tell him to come home right now. And if you tell him we're standing here, we're going to arrest you." She called me terrified. And I left my job, and I was on my way home. And I kept on asking her, "What's the matter?" Because it's not normal that she wouldn't say what the problem was. And "I can't tell you, I can't tell you." And I asked her so many times that the FDLE agent must have got frustrated, grabbed the phone out of her hand, The next thing I hear is, Mr. Esdale, where are you? This is FDLE. You need to come home. And their plan was working. I said, don't worry, pal, I'm on the way. Eventually, they let my wife leave. They said, ma'am, we're going to let you go pick up your son, but you go to the mall and don't come back. The neighbor who was watching this, they made her go in off her balcony and go in her house. Then my father-in-law came home in the middle of this, and they said to my father-in-law, sir, you don't want to be here when your son-in-law gets here. So he left. My father-in-law left. As soon as my wife left, she called me on the phone because one of the officers gave her a card with their name. And she said, don't go home, they're going to kill you. And I said, go meet me at the lawyer's office downtown Fort Lauderdale. We all met down there. She got my son, met there, came in, gave the card to my attorney. My attorney called the name and the card, the number on the card. And they were still waiting outside my mother-in-law's house for me. And my lawyer said to the FDLE agent, Mr. Esdale's sitting in my office. If you want to speak with him, you want to arrest him, whatever you want to do, he's sitting right here. And he gave the address. We sat there for an hour and no one ever came. A month later, I did a public records request for the incident at my mother-in-law's, and it said in there that they came to Baker Act me. And they were dispatched by the governor's office. So really what they were going to do, because, you know someone's upsetting your wife, you know your father's murder's covered. The plan worked. I was coming home, I was angry. I believe, because they had their guns drawn and their bulletproof vests on, I believe that I would have been shot that day, and they would have said, this guy became violent. We had to kill him.
So, Mark, when a client comes to you with this story, I'm sure you haven't had any other case like this. How do you advise them? Because this is not a typical case. This is someone that is potentially in fear of reprisal.
Well, Jeff, in the beginning, I'm sure Steve as well, when he first found me and advised me of the pendency of the probate proceedings, and the problems that he'd already experienced. He'd had another lawyer for a while. I was hoping that if we could keep the estate open and attempt to block what I saw that was happening, I guess at that point I was naively thinking that maybe the sheriff's department or some type of official investigation would occur that would then, of course, put a halt to the probate proceedings because of the Slayer statute. I guess that was the initial hope. And at one point, at one hearing, I was asking to stop the proceedings to see if FDLE was going to look into it. And of course, I used the term with Steve early on that it looks to me like this outcome is preordained because I think I shared with you, some of the hearings. It's the only case I've had in 34 years where repeatedly I felt I almost knew that I was going to have an adverse ruling because it happened repeatedly.
And in fact, we don't have enough time to go through all the examples, but there were some instances in which, for example, you had a witness, the 911 operator, who Steve believes committed perjury on several instances, walk out of a deposition when she was under your subpoena.
That's
and
correct.
The judge, not only did he not issue a contempt order, but in fact, he didn't even order that the deposition be reopened.
That's exactly correct, Jeff, and there's a record of that proceeding, motions filed, a hearing, and just cut me off that way. That was one example. There were many others.
Real quickly, we have about 2 minutes left, and I want to give Mark a chance to give his contact information out. In just a few seconds, I was wondering if either of you have any idea as to why such a wide-ranging conspiracy would be taking place.
I would defer to Steve because I learned a lot collaterally from him. He really dug into this. I mentioned to you that...
Steve, why don't you take it from here? We have just about a minute left.
I believe that they got so far deep into their cover-up that there's no... law enforcement doesn't like to admit when they're wrong. And they did so much, other than short of confessing to everything they did, they're not going to put themselves in jeopardy. They're dug in, and they're doing everything to make sure that this injustice is never corrected and that it's never shown that I've been right this whole time.
We're going to have to leave it at that. We have about a minute left. Mark, I'd like to ask that you give out your contact information in the event that our listeners might be in need of your services.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Jeff. It's Mark W. Lord, attorney at law. I'm located at 46 North Washington Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida, Suite 16D. Business telephone is 941-365-4995, and I have an email at litigationmess@gmail.com if anyone needs to talk.
I'd like to give a very special thanks to my guests, Mark Lord and Steve Esdale. Please tune in next week, Tuesday evening from 6 to 6:30. This is Talk Legal. I'm your host, Jeff Van Treese. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Talk Legal with Jeff Van Treese. Tune in next week for more insightful and exciting information about the law. You can contact Jeff by email at jvt2law@gmail.com or give him a call at 561-789-6866. That's 561-789-6866. The content of the preceding program, including all statements from the host and guests, is